Dear listeners, I'm so honored to share this first conversation in the Jet Reflection series with Acting President Kym Pinder. The Jet Reflection series is this new opportunity for the Jet office to share the conversations that we've been having since the office opened almost 2 years ago. I think the beauty about serving the community is that we're always in touch with everybody. And that's why I'm so excited that we get to have our first conversation with Kym, who is not only the interim president of Mass Art, but she's an art historian and curator and offers incredible perspectives from so many different areas. Our hope as an office is that the Jet Reflection series can thoughtfully engage the moment that we live in, so that we may serve our community not reactively, but compassionately. Now, without further ado, I invite you to listen to Kym and I discuss the role of advocacy in the study and exploration of art history.
So when I was looking at these questions, so when you said, what is the role of art history historically been in art institutions? And I'm thinking more about, being for 16 years at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in the art history theory and criticism department. It was presented to us, which I think is slightly different at Mass Art, but the art school that I feel that I was raised in, because I was there for so long, and I was hired there, that the art history department, art history theory and criticism, was there to provide this overall context for art makers. That it was really there. We thought of ourselves 100% as a service department to every single department, studio department in the school. And we felt definitely, and this is one of the people, they wouldn't think that, but at the School of the Art Institute, we didn't think of ourselves as less of scholars. Being in a service department, we thought of it as like really important and integral to an art school. As opposed to, for instance, for some of us, being in a traditional liberal arts school or at a university, where you were actually, the art history department would have been much less important. We thought of ourselves as we were the largest department for a while. I was just in touch with a couple of my friends that are still there at SAIC. It's gotten even larger. And it was and we were so important. We were like in the center of the art school world in many ways. Like we were the center with this history, with our spokes out, supportive spokes to all of the different studio areas. And when sculpture, for instance, kept saying there weren't enough history of sculpture classes, we were like, you got it. We are going to make sure that you have more. It wasn't at all a conflict. It was like, right, we need to have printmaking, history of printmaking and all this stuff. And one of the things that I was really proud to be a part of, and I actually don't know if it still exists, is that I was asked, like so many people, to rethink the survey. And how do you rethink the survey at an art school? And especially it was the modern survey, the second half of it. And, as you know, most of it was being taught by adjuncts, like no full-time people had any skin in the game. But when I was chair of the art history department, they would come to me and say, I can't believe I had a student in my senior seminar who had never heard of Duchamp, and I was like, put your money where your mouth is, get up there and teach them. And so as chair of art history, I was tasked with reconfiguring the second half of the survey, which I did with a big group of people who were teaching it. And we decided that it would be by medium. So there'd be the history of modern sculpture, the history of modern photography, the history of modern painting, the history of modern performance. And it was broken up into these smaller surveys that were very media specific. Again, this idea of serving the students who are making that art. So then it didn't become just like this required thing that they had to take, but the photography majors were like, oh, great, I'm going to get my survey credit by actually learning about the history of my medium. And they could also take other mediums, like a photography major could definitely take the history of sculpture and still get that credit. And the way that we did that is that I just asked the people teaching it, come to this meeting with 7 things that you think should be in a modern survey. 7 topics. And as you can imagine, they came and pretty much had the same topics, like general themes, like the role of technology, in modern art. So every single medium has that, right? It was such a great conversation that we had for, I'd say, about a semester,
Yeah.
and we reconfigured all those. We base created 101, 102, 103. It went all the way. By the time I left, we were at 111. So there were 11 different modern surveys that students could take. And then, as chair, I required all of the full time tenure track and tenured people to teach a range of classes. So they are required over their course load of a year that they had to teach at least one 200 level class, at least one 100 level class. And I was just trying to say, you can't just, as we know, just teach senior seminars and graduate seminars. So it's funny that we're talking about this because I just connected with Jim Elkins, who I'm sure you may know him as a critic and scholar he still is at SAIC. And he just was telling me on Monday that he was in charge of the survey that's like the David Nalta survey.
Yeah.
He was in charge of completely reconfiguring that to be fully integrated with the Studio Foundation year. Which is something that he and I talked about forever. He'd always wanted to do it as long as he was there. He's finally doing it this year. And I think it has a little bit to do with the pandemic because his goal is to, you have a lecture and then he goes into a Studio Foundation class. And there's like a part 2 studio based aspect of the lecture. Awesome, right?
I had that in high school, believe it or not. Like it was my freshman year. It was art appreciation class, but it was like very general art history. But we'd learn about a movement and we'd make work in response to it. And we were taught as artists that we're not outside this history and that we're constantly responding to what is happening historically and visually. So I think that really connected everybody and made everybody appreciate this history so much more and that they weren't disconnected from it, which I feel like this is just, I'm speaking for personal experience here, but it always felt a little bit like that at Mass Art, that some people just didn't, they really wouldn't invest so much in their history classes because they're like, what does this have to do with me,
Yep, exactly.
So that's incredible to hear that. I haven't seen that model in so long.
Yeah, and he is so excited about it. He's been at SAIC, oh my God, since 85, early 80s. And this is something because he has an MFA and a PhD. And I remember when I first came there, he said, well, when I was interviewed in the 80s, I was asked to do this and I still haven't done it. So he was so excited to talk to me about it on Monday that he was finally doing this thing that he felt he was hired to do decades ago and had been wanting to do. And a lot of his scholarship is about creating sort of a type of art history that's conversational and interesting for artists.
Yeah.
So, if you just look at all the books that he's published, they are really, what painting is one, and it's all about questioning and asking how have artists discussed painting and thought of painting through the history of art. He had felt that that's what he was supposed to be doing at SAC his entire life. And he has been doing that. To finally do it on the first year level, he's so excited. When art students would ask me, what's the point of this? And when I'm telling a great lecture about an interpretation of a work of art or something, and they inevitably, because I was teaching artists, they would say, well, what if the artist wasn't thinking about anything when they did this?
Yeah.
And all this history, is not real. Like you're just making it up. And my answer would always be to them, I always like to give the artist the benefit of the doubt that they have thoughts in their heads when they're making art.
Only some, right?
And it's important for those thoughts, whatever they are, to be discussed or to be, for us to be privy to them, hopefully. So this is a model for all of you to think deeply about why you make art and what thoughts are in your head when you're making it. So,
Absolutely. I think like the beauty of it is that we have so much room to like engage with the work. I mean, although the artists, if they had intentions or not of being what the interpretation is, either way, the art exists in that level. You know, if they put it out there in the world, they knew that there was going to be room for people to connect with it in their own through their own personal experiences and put their own thoughts and ideas behind it. So a part of it is like kind of accepting that that's part of your tract or your practice.
mhm.
So
Yeah. And, and I would also, I think it's really, again, this is
yeah.
going on to the next question about art and art history and activism. And, that that programming that I feel that you're going to be a part of and Lisa's doing, like to really help artists. I don't say help them be activists, but just to support them
Yeah.
in activism. And that relates to the history of art history, like knowing other artists and how they were able to make transformational art that actually made a difference. Knowing about artists that dropped being artists when they had to be activists, like that there are all these options for you
Mhm.
as an artist who cares about social practice and history and wanting to make a difference. And there's so many wonderful, I mean, for me, because I have focused on African American art history in a lot of my endeavors with art activism and my scholarship, it's just great to offer that range, and I'm often mentioning, for instance, Norman Lewis, who was part of that group of artists that Romar Bearden was in, and they were trying to do the Spiral Group, which was an attempt to deal with racial topics. And there's great transcripts about how they were talking about, look, we're all these Black artists, how do we come together and try and engage in 1966 or 7, whenever they started this movement that's happening that we all care about. And they only had one show, and it was a black and white show, so that was a way for them to include representational Black artists, abstract Black artists, by just having a show that the palette, no matter what it was, the palette of the work was black and white. And then they had, described that was how they were dealing with this. But even that, having to come to that conclusion reflects how do you engage a diverse range of art making when everyone is feeling the same thing, right? So it's such a great example. And then you have this wonderful quotation from Norman Lewis, who started off being a social realist and then went very abstract, but not abstract enough because his work had content. So when he was trying to be a part of the abstract expressionists, they were just like, you have titles like Harlem Courtyard. No, it should be like number 45. And again, fantastic quotations by him that are in Ann Gibson's book on abstract expressionism and diversity and difference, where he was like, I can't extract myself from what's going on, so I have to have titles. And then he has a great quote where he said, because there are wonderful images of him like marching with "I am a man," poster, billboard, and he said, I can't just paint pictures of Black fists. I actually have to go out and protest. And so again, their dialogue that has since been published, it was one of the things I really wanted to publish about 20 years ago, was them coming together at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I think in 69, around that Harlem on My Mind show. And we had this wonderful roundtable that someone has published recently.
It's on the White Walling.
Is that it? Okay.
I think it is. Yeah.
And so
the Whitney and all those others.
Yeah. So like that's the kind of stuff that I hope when we're trying to pull people together with, I don't want to say like educating them on how to be activists, but just giving them a context. That they're not alone. They're not the first people to do this. There are good ways and less successful ways, and that you have a range of history that's accessible that you can pull from and do your own thing, but just to know that there are success stories, and there are failed stories too, failure stories. So that's the activism part of it. Oh, how do you see art history and activism as a practice? That was your question. So
but no, I think that perfectly answers it, because I think right now in our time we're all learning to be activists in so many different ways. It's an urge. it's a movement within yourself that you have to go out there and make those choices. And so just presenting these things in its history is so impactful because there are different ways to inspire and teach too. So that, I think that perfectly answers the question.
So now I've like pulled out some art, especially for my poor son who's going to start college here inside his house and in a couple of weeks or next week. So that is actually part of a mural project that I did. So talk about art history is activism. So as you know, I taught mural classes and history of mural class, and then it transformed when a school that my kids went to, a Montessori school, public school, one of the few that started in Chicago as an experiment, public Montessori. They asked me to, they were in a completely kind of abandoned old school, all white walls, and they said, hey, can you do some murals? So that started a transformation in my class. That was a history of mural class that became history through practice. And I ended up doing maybe 4 or 5 versions of that class in which it resulted in a mural. The last one I did was actually in Albuquerque that I think you do know about, or you can Google it and see this amazing mural that the class made on the outside of a healthcare for the homeless facility in collaboration with the public art program in Albuquerque. And so that was kind of the last one I did. And then the last time I actually taught the class, it became directed very specifically in examining a racist mural on the UNM campus. And the entire class was kind of like a series of guest speakers that were kind of curated by me and a couple of other people who were co-teaching the class. And the results for that, using the model of the mural proposals that I always had in the other classes, was that the different groups of students created proposals that I was just looking at last night because I was looking through murals on my desktop, trying to find some things. And it was, I think, 9 groups, and they each created proposals on what to do with the racist mural.
Yeah.
And so that was, I feel, another example. That's another one of my favorite examples of how art history can be activist, right? And the students absolutely just felt it was one of the best experiences they ever had. They were taking an art history class, but actually we made sure that it cross-listed with 8 different disciplines. So Native American Studies had a number, American Studies had a number, studio art had a number, sociology had a number. Again, there was 8 different cross listings. So then we got all of these interdisciplinary people to come together, which I felt was my little experiment on what I think the future of university education should be. And then we curated the groups so they all had a mix of different disciplines and different levels of seniors to freshmen. There was also this kind of mentoring aspect of it, which was really amazing because there was definitely a leader, like a couple of leaders that helped the groups come together. And the students felt that, they were taking a class that actually had this real result, that they knew from the beginning that they were going to become experts on what this mural meant, its history, what histories it was referencing, and that their proposals were going to be presented to the president of the university to choose from and to consider on how to address this mural. So that's another example of how art history actually can have a very activist component. I think that it's transformed quite a bit. And as you read in my decolonizing piece, a lot of that transformation, I feel, has to do with the importance of public art, really coming into its own as a real type of work of art to be studied. The history as a practice, the same as graffiti, which I feel is coming into its own, has been in the last 10 years. And actually, that was one of those classes that I started as the chair of the department. So I as the chair, and this is, I feel like my kind of inching through as an administrator and using those points of power to help art history be what I think it should be. So one of the things that I did when I was chair of the department is that I actually created a history of graffiti class because I knew of a former student who I had followed. He had first taken my history of mural class, which is murals to graffiti.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing person who has created, he came back to SAIC and got an art ed master's in graffiti making. And he's been doing it in the schools. He created a gallery for graffiti artists. He goes into the schools in Chicago and started over 15 years ago a shoe design sort of entrepreneurial class in high schools in Pilsen and other areas that he lives in. And he's just my favorite person about graffiti. So I was so happy when I was chair and enough books had really come out so you could have some good textbooks at this point.
Yes.
This show had just come out.
Mm-hmm.
That was in LA, Art of the Streets. And I knew one person who would be perfect to teach it. And so I don't know if he's still teaching, but he taught it for a long time at SAIC after I put it on the books.
Wow.
So
That's really incredible.
yeah, and and he's just an activist artist too. So of course, so much of graffiti is about that.
Of course.
Yeah.
I personally have gotten so much out of this conversation, so I'm really happy. But thank you so much for talking to me about, art history and its role in activism. So I think this is going to be helpful for even students and faculty to think about art history at Mass Art as well, and how it can be integrated so much more, especially in this new political climate and pandemic climate and stuff like that. So
yeah, I hope so.